everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have another tier list video for you. It's been a bit since I've done one of these. And today I'm going to be ranking all of the books that I have read so far in 2024. You can see all of those here. There's a couple of them here that I have not yet finished, actually, so those won't necessarily be included, but all the rest of them are right here. So for this list, I'm going to just be ranking the books that I have read during the first 6 months of the year. And I thought doing this video might be fun, just because you can just kind of get a taste of what I'm thinking for my reading this year, what I really liked, what I didn't like so much, and everything in between. I know other channels like to do these kinds of things in the middle of the year, and last year I did a mid-year video as well. It was a different one than this format, but I thought this would be fun. So before I get started, first of all, usual thing that I typically say in this this tier list style video, which I've done a couple times. I'm recording this on my phone, so the formatting's not as good as it might otherwise be. So I do apologize for that, but I think the video should go fine anyway. I have read and finished most of these. There's a couple here that I haven't read, which I'll point out when I get to them. And also, I am not including rereads in this list. I tend to not include rereads in my rankings, but since I'm doing so many of them this year, I'm trying to do at least one per month. I may, at the end of the year, maybe do something about the rereads, but I probably will not include them in my definitive ranking whenever I do that, and I'm not including them in this one. And so there are probably a good 5 or 6 books that I have read this year that are not on this list just because they were rereads. But otherwise, there are, I believe, 19 books right here on this list. So, or I think 20 actually. But there's 2 of them here that I haven't actually, one of them I haven't read and one of them I haven't finished. So 18 here that I have finished. So to get things started, we have Percy Jackson Book 3, which is The Titan's Curse. This one I'm going to put B tier, and obviously if you don't know how this works, S tier is at the top, D tier is at the bottom. They're just ranked by how much I like them. So, Titan's Curse, pretty much, my thoughts on pretty much all the Percy Jackson books are pretty similar. Enjoyable, really like the characters and the writing style, like the narrative voice and things like that. Just a good, solid, fun book. Nothing real exciting to say about it. It's just a good time. Then we have this here. The standout on this list is a book called Becoming Nicole, which I didn't even really talk about on the channel because it's a nonfiction book, and it was actually one that my wife had to read for school that she listened to on audiobook, and I listened to it with her. And it was actually pretty interesting. It's essentially about a child who was transgender in the state that I live in Maine, and the journey of that family through that process. It was actually quite interesting. I put it in B tier. It's not like a book that I would enjoy necessarily on the same level as these other ones, because I tend to be more of a fiction reader than a nonfiction reader. But for a nonfiction book, I thought it was rather interesting and pretty cool to read, actually. Then we have A Touch of Darkness, another standout, because this is a romance book, which I tend to not read much of. This is also going in B tier. I swear I will start using other tiers soon. A Touch of Darkness, this is a romance retelling of Hades and Persephone from Greek mythology, which I enjoyed more than I expected to. I tend to not really be a romance person. At least I tend to not think of myself that way, but I did rather enjoy this one. I think it was quite a fun book, despite my initial apprehension about it, I suppose. Then we have Beren and Luthien by J.R.R. Tolkien, one of my favorite authors, but unfortunately this one, I'm going to put it in C tier. The main story itself would probably go a little higher, probably B tier, I would guess, but the thing with this book is it was not a usual narrative. It was like the story which itself I think was only 60 or 70 pages, and then a lot of different versions of the story, lots of behind the scenes, like notes and things like that, which were interesting to read, but it wasn't really what I wanted out of it. So as far as the core of the story itself, it was decent, and I enjoyed it, but for the overall book, just was not quite there for me, unfortunately. But it was worthwhile, and even the behind the scenes type stuff was still pretty interesting to read. And then we have the first two books in Will White's The Elder Empire series, or the first books in each of the trilogies, because it's two separate trilogies but are one series. And the first two I read, which is the first book of the Sea trilogy and the first book of the Shadow trilogy. And I rather enjoyed both of these. I would put, of Sea and Shadow, actually I'm going to rank these also really quick, because why not? So I'm going to put Of Sea and Shadow at the top of B tier. Favorite book of the tier goes here, closer to the letter, and least favorite goes towards the back. Of Sea and Shadow was really good. I really loved the world building in this book and in the series in general. At the time I'm recording this, I'm actually in the middle of reading the next book in the series, I just love the world building in this series, and I think this book does a good job of introducing the world, the characters, all those things. I do think the thing with this book that let me down a little was the plot and characters was not as engaging to me as the world building, but they were still good and I enjoyed the book quite a bit. Then we have Of Shadow and Sea, which I enjoyed slightly more than Of Sea and Shadow, so that's going to go in A tier. I think this one did get the characters and the plot right for me and expanded on the world building in some very interesting ways and approached the story a little differently. The Sea book was kind of a seafaring type thing, whereas the Shadow book was assassins, and both of these books overlap in terms of their events and things like that, which was really cool. But I think I just enjoyed the approach of Shadow and Sea a little more, and I enjoyed the characters and things like that a bit more. So pretty similar thoughts on both of them, but I just liked that one just a slight bit more. And then we have Yumi and the Nightmare by Brandon Sanderson. Now, this is a Sanderson book, so it should be no surprise that I'm going to put it in S tier. Not that every book by Brandon Sanderson would go in S tier, but I tend to really love his books, and this was one of my favorite Cosmere books that I have ever read at this point. I would put this on the same level as his Stormlight Archive books, which to me are pretty much at the top of most books that I've read. So I really enjoyed Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. It's my favorite of his standalones. Easily, I would say. Warbreaker comes close, but I think this one definitely edges it out, and definitely is one of my favorite Sanderson books. Just loved the characters and the story, and the world building, like everything. There's some really interesting mysteries going on with it. I was always really excited about it. It's one of those books where I read it in a couple days, but every time I put it down, I would put it down wanting to continue, which I think is definitely a good sign. It was one of those books that, like, when I finished it, it was very satisfying, but I was kind of sad that it was over, but I really enjoyed it a lot. It's definitely one of my favorite books I've read this year. Picking my favorite for this year so far is actually kind of difficult, but this is definitely a contender. Then we have The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett, one of his Discworld books. In fact, the first Discworld book ever written. I would put this in C tier. Decent book, definitely the weakest in Discworld I've read so far. I've read 4, including this one, and this one is definitely my least favorite, but it was still good, it was still fun, had some enjoyable stuff to it. I almost would be tempted to put it into B tier, but I think C tier is probably about where I'd put it. It's a good book, for sure, but I can see why a lot of people don't recommend starting with this book and instead recommend something like Mort or Small Gods or Guards, which I haven't read that one yet, but, you know, starting with a different book than this seems to be the preferred option, and I can see why. It's a good book, it's just not, you know, he hadn't come into his stride yet with Discworld, so definitely is the weakest of the ones I've read so far, but still a pretty solid book. Then we have Destiny's Way from the Star Wars New Jedi Order series. I am rapidly approaching the end of this series, and this is one of my favorites in New Jedi Order for sure. That's going in S tier. Below Yumi, I would say, but still very, very high up there. This is one of my favorite books in New Jedi Order. I'd say maybe top 3. It's hard to say. There have been some real bangers in New Jedi Order, let me tell you. But this one was really, really excellent. Absolutely loved it. And not only was it impressive in its own right, but it was following up Traitor, which is probably my favorite in the series, and was almost, I would say, as amazing as that book. So following up Traitor was such a great book, was also impressive to me. So really enjoyed this one a lot. Yeah, definitely one of my favorites in the series so far. I intend, once I finish New Jedi Order, to do a ranking of that series, and you can expect Destiny's Way to land quite highly on that list. Then we have the next Percy Jackson book, which is The Battle of the Labyrinth. This one I would put probably top of C tier here. It's my least favorite Percy Jackson book. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with it in comparison to the others, but I think by the point I was getting 3 and 4 books in, I was kind of feeling like the series got a bit stale, and so I was kind of bored a little bit reading it. Like, it was good, and it didn't do anything that the rest of the series... Like, it didn't do anything that the rest of the series also didn't do. Like, I think everything that the series does well, it includes. It just, by that point, I was kind of tired of it. Still a good book. Definitely, I think, on equal footing with the other ones, but just because of that fatigue, I guess, I just would put it a little bit lower than the others. Then we have I, Jedi, another Star Wars book here. This one I would put in B tier. I'd say middle of B tier. This was a weird book for me because it tended to bounce between things that I absolutely loved and things that I really did not care about, and there was almost no in between. The stuff I liked, I really liked, but the stuff that I didn't care for, I just could not get through it fast enough, meaning that in more of a negative way than a positive one. Just wasn't into certain aspects of this book, but the parts that I did enjoy, I really enjoyed. So it's kind of a weird one. It's kind of hard for me to put a real kind of number on it in terms of like rating it or things like that. But I think all in all, B tier, mid B tier is pretty safe for my overall thoughts on it. And then we have The Last Ritual by S.A. Sidor. This is an Arkham horror book, which I absolutely loved. Also one of my favorite reads of the year. I don't know if I'd put it above Destiny's Way or not. The S tier, I already know there's going to be another book or two on here, and ranking them is very, very difficult for me. So could go above, could go below. For now, I'll just leave it right where it is. But I absolutely loved this. This is kind of a Lovecraftian cosmic horror type of book, or at least takes some inspiration from that. I wouldn't say it's all in all a cosmic horror book, but it definitely borrows some Lovecraftian elements that I really enjoyed, and was just an amazing book that I really loved. Just was super fun to read, really interesting plot, different things like that. I was always wondering what was going to come next, and I had a great time with it, for sure. Out of the 2 Arkham horror books that I have read, this was the easy favorite, I would say. And then we have Carrie, yet another S tier book. I really loved Carrie. I really enjoyed Salem's Lot. I'm going to put it above Last Ritual. I'll put it above Destiny's Way as well. I really loved Carrie. I've read 2 Stephen King books so far, the other one being Salem's Lot, and while I really enjoyed Salem's Lot, Carrie I liked on an even higher level than that, in so many ways. It was another one where I always just wanted to see what was coming next. I was really interested in the story. The characters I found very compelling. I loved the themes of this book. There was some really, really interesting themes that I really enjoyed in this book. Just overall was a fantastic read, and absolutely one of my favorite books of the year so far. I really, really loved it a lot. Then we have the Force Heretic trilogy from the New Jedi Order. I did not read these in the order that they're in. These other 2 would kind of go at the back of the list here, but I'll talk about them together. Force Heretic 1, I would put in D tier, unfortunately. In fact, I'd put both of these first two books in D tier. As of the moment I'm recording this, I have not read Force Heretic 3. I intend to read it soon, but I have not gotten to it just yet. But I have read the first two, and both would go in D tier. I'd put the second one ahead of the first one, though, if I can get it to work. There we go. I feel like these two books, to me, were just really not that engaging. There were certain parts of both of them that I really enjoyed, but as a whole, they are like some of the weakest books in New Jedi Order for me. Just generally felt they were kind of mediocre in the grand scheme of the series. Did have some good stuff to them overall, especially the second one I think had some really cool stuff going on. But overall, just didn't really do it for me. I wouldn't say they're bad. Don't take them being in D tier as me saying they're bad. But they were just like, I think I rated both of them like 6.5 out of 10. You know, they were decent, but not amazing. There aren't any bad books I've read this year. So even, you know, books lower in these tiers I wouldn't say are bad. But yeah, just didn't care for these. Have not read Reunion yet, so I'm not going to give any thoughts on that. Then we have the High Republic Cataclysm, which I surprisingly, for me, enjoyed quite a lot. I'm going to put it in top of A tier. I really enjoyed Cataclysm. I was a little unsure about it coming off of Convergence, which I read last year, and thought was just okay. But I really enjoyed Cataclysm a lot. I really loved a lot of stuff going on with the story, with the plot. I really enjoyed some of the character stuff. This one, I would say, probably had one of the strongest and most interesting plots in the High Republic so far. I had a great time with it. Then we have Black Spire, another Star Wars book here. This one is also going to A tier. I'd say middle of A tier, if I can do it. There we go. This one took some time for me to get going. Was not quite feeling it towards the beginning. Like, it was good, but it wasn't amazing. But then around, I think, the halfway point where the characters really started to shine for me, and I really enjoyed the characters in this book a whole lot. That really is the thing that really worked for me with this book. Was there was a really fun cast of characters that were both enjoyable on their own and also in the group, bouncing off each other, their dynamics they had together. Really enjoyed that part of the story a lot, and also the plot, I think, did get pretty interesting as it went along, and I enjoyed the world building as well. It was just some really good stuff with that book. Just a little bit slow to start. And then the last book that's actually going to be in this ranking, because of Dawn and Darkness here, I'm in the middle of right now, so I'm not going to rank it. If I were to include it, I'd probably put it in B tier, but I'm not going to definitively say because I haven't finished it yet. So the last one we have is Percy Jackson 5, which I'd put it in the bottom of A tier. This was my favorite Percy Jackson book so far. I enjoyed it a whole lot. Really action-packed, really fun, tonally a bit darker than the rest of the series, which I enjoyed. A very satisfying conclusion to the series. I really enjoyed it a lot, and also felt rather unique. All the other books in the series kind of felt to me like they had a pretty similar formula, kind of doing the same ideas, but with different, different plot lines, different character arcs, or not necessarily different character arcs, but continuations of the same character arcs, and going to different places and things. But they followed kind of similar structure. This one felt a little different to me, which I really enjoyed, and had a great time with it. So this here is the final tier list. Pretty even spread, it looks like. Which I kind of didn't expect. Usually I tend to have a lot of stuff higher up and not as much stuff lower, which the lower tiers are a bit less populated, but still pretty evenly spread. So I've had a pretty balanced year in terms of how much I've enjoyed things, I guess. But generally have had a really solid year so far, have really enjoyed a lot of stuff, and have found some new favorite books there in the S tier. Really loved all four of those a lot. And really loved a lot of the stuff in A tier, B tier, and so on. And really excited for the rest of the year. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff that I'm very excited to read during the rest of the year, and I think the rest of the year will be a bit more varied as well. This half of the year has had a lot of Star Wars, which will continue. Although there's not a whole lot really represented here, I would say. Probably less than half of the tier list. But a lot of series books, a lot of New Jedi Order, a lot of those Elder Empire books, a lot of Percy Jackson, and so on. So a lot of series stuff, which will continue also, but I have quite a few standalones that I'm hoping to read in the next half of the year, and a lot of different stuff that I'm very excited about. So hopefully by the time the end of the year comes, we'll have a nice variety of stuff that I will have read this year and stuff that I'm very excited for. So that's pretty much it for the tier list. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these and what you thought of them, and if you agree or disagree with my placements and things like that. And what are your favorite and least favorite books that you have read so far this year? I'm excited to read any comments that you may have about your reading this year as well. So that's pretty much it for this video. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you all next time.